Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
When I stepped out of the rental car and onto the old cracked driveway, something in my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since I was 19 and stupid enough to think coming home pregnant was just bringing family closer. The house looked the same on the outside, same white shutters, same sagging front porch with that stupid little ceramic goose in a Santa hat, but it felt different, like even the bricks knew I didn't belong anymore. It had been 5 years since I last crossed that threshold, and if I'm being honest, I didn't miss it. Not really. You don't miss a place where your memories were rearranged by someone else's version of the truth. I hadn't planned to come this year, but Dad called me in early November. Just said, "It's time," and I knew what he meant. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't beg. Just 3 words, flat, and waited. I hadn't spoken to Mom since the last fight, the one where she called me a disappointment loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but I figured it might be the last Christmas we were all under the same roof. Or maybe I just wanted to see if anything had changed. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first: cinnamon, roasted ham, fresh pine, and something overly floral. Mom always overdid the candles. The living room was straight out of a Hallmark movie. Garland on the staircase, stockings embroidered with names, even matching plaid pajamas laid out on the couch. There were 6 of them. I don't know why that detail stuck with me, 6 sets, not 7. Like they had counted heads and decided I wasn't showing. Bree came around the corner first, holding a mug that said "Best Mom Ever," like it was subtle. She looked good: new hair, fake lashes, white sweater that probably cost half my rent. "Gracie," she squealed like she was 10 again. She hugged me like we were close, like the last time we spoke hadn't ended with her calling me bitter. I hugged her back, arms loose. Her perfume made my eyes water. Then Mom came in. Her apron was dusted with flour, and she had that tight smile on, the one she wore at church when people asked about me. She walked right past me and wrapped Bree up in both arms. "This home is hers now," she said, loud and clear, like she was performing for a goddamn audience. "She's the heart of this house." And, just like that, I disappeared. I laughed. Not out loud, but deep in my chest, the kind of laugh that tastes like pennies. I looked over at Dad, sitting in his recliner, eyes glued to the fireplace like it could swallow him whole. He didn't say a word. He hadn't said much in years. I used to think he was spineless, but now I think he just learned to keep quiet if he wanted peace. Bree's kids were tearing through gift bags, tossing ribbons like confetti, and I stood there holding the one box I'd brought. It was small, flat, rectangular, nothing special, but it was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, in consequence. We went through the motions: eggnog, charades, that stupid family movie where Bree always played the star, and I was stuck holding the camera. Dinner was roast beef and potatoes, and Mom made the same accidental comment about how Bree's kids were a blessing because some women just never figure it out. My fork scraped the plate so loud it made the dog bark. I didn't react, just smiled and nodded like I always do. I've mastered the art of eating rage with mashed potatoes. After dinner, we moved to the tree. Mom handed out gifts with the glee of a game show host. Bree got diamond earrings. I got a monogram towel set. I could barely hide the smirk when I unwrapped it. "Thanks," I said, holding up the embroidered G like it was a participation trophy. Then I reached into my coat pocket. The room dimmed a little, like even the lights knew something was about to shift. I pulled out the envelope, cream-colored, thick paper, sealed with a plain red sticker. No glitter, no bow, just a name on the front, to be opened by Dad. Alone. I didn't hand it to him. I walked over and slid it under the tree, tucking it beneath the branches like a landmine. "That one's for later," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Bree narrowed her eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. Exactly what I said. Mom raised an eyebrow, already trying to calculate whether this was a stunt or a threat. I gave her nothing. Just sat back down, poured myself another glass of wine, and watched the fire eat up another log. The flames danced, loud and wild, but the room was dead silent. They all knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Yet. And I was ready to let them squirm. The next morning started the way every fake perfect holiday does, too many voices layered over each other, cinnamon rolls that were more for show than taste. And Bree already halfway into some story about how hard it was to get the twins into preschool with a proper STEM curriculum. I sat at the edge of the kitchen island, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug that still had my name on it, watching her flit between cabinets like she owned the place, which, apparently, she now did. Or so Mom wanted us all to believe. Mom followed her around like a shadow with a pastry brush, cooing about the meal prep, the decorations, the way Bree's garland coordination showed real taste. I counted 4 compliments in under 5 minutes, and not a single one landed on me, not that I was fishing. I wasn't. I just noticed. It's like noticing your name not being called during roll call. Technically no one meant to hurt you, but the silence still stings. Bree's boys were chasing each other through the living room, one of them knocking over a ceramic angel, which shattered across the hardwood like a gunshot. Everyone jumped except Bree, who laughed and said, "Boys will be boys." Mom agreed. She used to smack me with a wooden spoon for breathing too loud during Christmas Mass, but sure, now it's cute. I leaned back, glanced at Dad, who was sitting on the recliner again, same blank stare, same coffee cup filled with something too clear to be coffee. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I thought maybe, just maybe, there was something there, some shared understanding, like he saw how ridiculous all this had become. But then he looked away, toward the fireplace, like he couldn't stomach the weight of anything real. There were 9 people at the table that night. Well, technically 10 if you count Dad, even though he barely spoke. Or wait, was it 11? Ugh, math was never my thing, but you get the idea. There were enough people to fill the seats, but not enough honesty to fill a thimble. Dinner was a production. Bree served turkey like she'd cooked it herself, though I saw the packaging from Whole Foods earlier that morning. No one said anything. Mom gave a little speech before the prayer, something about family and healing and moving forward as one, and I almost laughed, but my tongue was busy trying to keep the bitterness from spilling over. Bree toasted with sparkling cider, and her husband, Rick, gave a short, awkward speech about gratefulness while checking his phone under the table. Bree scolded him, but with that flirty little wink like they were the king and queen of domestic bliss. I picked at my plate, barely tasting a thing. I used to sit at that table and feel like part of something real. That was before I got pregnant at 17, before Mom stopped looking at me with anything but exhaustion. It wasn't just the pregnancy, hell, people mess up all the time, but in this house, mistakes were only forgivable if they were invisible. Bree knew how to hide hers. I didn't. The conversation turned to real estate at some point. Bree and Rick were thinking of expanding, maybe flipping a second property. Mom lit up like a Christmas tree, talking about how financially savvy Bree had become. "You've built a life anyone would envy," she said, and Bree smiled that polished smile like she believed it. I almost asked if anyone envied being 34 and stuck in a beige marriage where your husband had a wandering eye and your self-worth was tied to Pinterest boards, but I didn't. I let the words burn a hole in my cheek instead. After dessert, while everyone was half-dozing on the couch and Bree was telling some story about a PDA bake sales scandal like it was Watergate, she finally noticed the envelope under the tree. I watched her bend down in her too-tight skirt, read the front, and frown. "To be opened by Dad." "Alone," she said, holding it up between her French manicured fingers like it might bite her. "What is this? Some dramatic stunt?" I sipped my wine and smiled, slow and deliberate. "It's the only honest gift under this tree." Mom's head snapped toward me, and for a moment, her eyes weren't filled with annoyance or judgment, they were filled with fear. Just a flicker, gone as fast as it came. Bree narrowed her eyes, clearly deciding whether to push it or let it go. She opted for a scoff and set the envelope on the side table like it was beneath her concern. Dad didn't say a word, but I saw his hand twitch near the armrest. Something in him stirred, I could feel it. And I waited. I waited like a hunter in the dark, patient and still. Because the thing about the truth is, once it's been wrapped, labeled, and placed right in front of the people who've spent years running from it, well, they can't help themselves. Sooner or later, someone's gonna open it. The house had that bloated silence right after a big meal, where everyone's pretending they're content, but all the air feels stale with unsaid things, like someone just exhaled a truth and everyone's trying to ignore the smell. The envelope sat there on the side table for almost an hour, untouched but not unseen, and I could feel it pulling at the room like gravity. No one said a word about it again, but everyone's eyes kept darting back to it, like they were waiting for it to grow legs and start walking. I knew my moment would come, I didn't rush it. You don't rush this kind of storm. You watch it build, watch the clouds crawl in slow, and wait until the sky can't hold itself together anymore. Dad stood up eventually, clearing his throat like he needed to justify the act of standing. He looked down at the envelope, then up at me. I didn't flinch. He picked it up like it was fragile or sacred, or maybe like he already knew something inside it would change everything, and he wasn't sure he wanted it to. I'm going to the den, he said, like anyone was going to follow him. Nobody moved. Bree was scrolling on her phone again, pretending not to care, but her thumb had stopped. Mom reached for her wine, but missed the glass by an inch. I just leaned back in my chair and let the fire crackle behind me. The den door clicked shut. Then there was nothing. No footsteps. No paper rustling. No gasp. Just a long, awful nothing. I pictured him unfolding the page, reading the top line, reading it again, letting the words sink through 30-some years of marriage and trust and performative normalcy. I imagined the way his stomach must have dropped, how the air probably vanished out of his lungs like a sudden punch. When the door opened again, it didn't slam. He didn't stomp. He walked back into the room like something inside him had been surgically removed, slow, hollow, like the bones were still adjusting to the loss. He stood there in front of the tree, holding the page in both hands, fingers shaking just enough to catch the light. His eyes moved around the room once, landing on Mom like a scope locking in on a target. "What did you do?" he asked her, voice low but sharp enough to split granite. Mom didn't move. For a moment I thought she might lie again, but she just blinked, looked at the page, then at him, then back down at her lap. No denial. No protest. Just silence. That was the worst part, honestly, not even trying to defend herself. Just letting the truth stretch out in the open, like a corpse on the floor. The room froze. Bree finally looked up, her brows pulling together, voice higher than usual. "What is going on?" she asked, clearly irritated but with that edge of panic that she couldn't quite mask. Dad turned toward her, and, for the first time in my entire life, I saw hatred on his face, not anger, not disappointment, not frustration. Hatred. But it wasn't for her. It was for what had been stolen from him. "You're not my daughter," he said, like he'd just bitten into a mouthful of ash. "That's what this says. You're not mine." The room cracked open then. Bree's mouth dropped, her whole face twisted, and she laughed, one of those sharp, desperate, trying to deflect kind of laughs. "That's a joke, right?" she said, looking around like one of us would join in. "This is some kind of messed up prank?" I could see her brain trying to run laps around what was happening, but it kept tripping over itself. She looked at Mom, who still hadn't said a word, just kept staring down at her untouched wine like it could offer her a way out of this. "Mom," Bree said, her voice breaking like a rusted hinge. "Say something. Tell them this is ridiculous." Mom finally looked up. Her mouth opened, and then closed. And when she finally did speak, it wasn't loud, but it gutted the room clean. "It was one time," she said. "Before your father and I were married. I didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered. Like the last 30-plus years were a clerical error. Like paternity was just a footnote." Bree made a sound I can't even describe, something between a sob and a growl, and stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. "I don't believe this," she said, but she did. Her face said she did. Her whole body knew it. The color drained from her as fast as the warmth did from the room. Dad sat back down in the recliner, still holding the page like it might finish reading itself if he waited long enough. He didn't even look at me. Didn't need to. I wasn't the one with answers this time. Bree was pacing now, back and forth in her ugly holiday socks with the candy canes, mumbling to herself, pulling at her hair. "This doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense," over and over like repetition could change blood. Then Dad looked up at her, voice quieter now, like he didn't even have the strength for rage. "Do you know who your real father is?" And Bree froze. Pale. Silent. Every muscle in her face locked down. The world just stopped moving. And that was all I needed to know. The next few minutes dragged out like a funeral with no casket, just grief hanging in the air with nowhere to land, while everyone sat frozen, unsure whether to cry, scream, or pretend nothing had happened at all. Bree was the first to move, but it wasn't graceful or composed. It was panicked and erratic, like her body had suddenly decided it didn't belong in the room anymore. She backed away from Dad like his question was radioactive, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though she could hold her identity together with just bare hands and desperation. "I don't know what that means," she whispered, and I could tell by the crack in her voice that some part of her did. She just didn't want to admit it aloud, not here, not now, not in front of all the people who'd built her pedestal with careful hands and blind eyes. Dad didn't press her, not yet. He just kept sitting there with the paper in his lap, and his fingers twitching, eyes dull and heavy like someone had pulled the world out from under him and left him floating in that horrible space where nothing feels real but everything hurts anyway. I'd never seen him look at her like that before, not even when she crashed his truck in high school and lied about it, not even when she spent his savings on her destination wedding that got canceled 2 weeks before the flight. This wasn't disappointment. This was heartbreak in its purest form, the kind that leaves you empty instead of angry. Mom finally stood, slow like her bones were heavier than they had been 5 minutes ago, and she tried to speak, but her voice had that brittle, defensive edge that made you want to slap it right out of the air. "It was a mistake," she said, and I almost laughed because the word felt so small in the room. "It was one night. Before we were married. We moved on." "We?" I said, the word snapping from my mouth like a rubber band. "No, you moved on." He never even got the chance to choose whether he wanted to. She turned toward me, face flushed, mouth drawn tight like she was gearing up for one of her signature lectures, the ones that usually ended with me being told I'd ruined my life and should stop blaming her for it. "Don't make this about you, Grace," she said, because of course she did. That line was her favorite weapon. And just like that, everything I'd held in for years boiled up so fast I couldn't even taste it before it was already flooding out. "Make this about me?" I laughed, but it wasn't funny, not even close. "You made everything about Bree since the minute she was born. You called me a failure because I got pregnant too young, but you were lying to your husband before your wedding day and never once owned it. You exiled me for my mistakes while building a shrine around hers. And now that the truth is here, you still want to control the narrative." Bree had sunk down onto the floor by then, legs folded under her like a child, sobbing so loud it barely sounded human. "I didn't know," she kept saying through snot and spit and mascara running in crooked trails down her cheeks. "I swear I didn't know. I thought I was just the good daughter." I asked, voice sharp enough to slice glass. "You were. That's the cruelest part. You didn't even have to try. Mom made sure of that. And the rest of us just learned how to live in your shadow." Dad stood up slowly, like he wasn't sure how to carry the weight of himself anymore. He didn't look at Mom. He didn't look at Bree. He didn't even look at me. He just walked out of the room, footsteps echoing through the house like a countdown. I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't need to. He was going to breathe air that didn't stink of betrayal. Mom sat down hard on the edge of the couch, face pale and hollow, eyes darting between the fireplace and the paper still lying on the armrest. The truth so plain now, no one could pretend it wasn't staring us down. Bree was still sobbing, trying to gather the pieces of her world back into her shaking hands, but there was nothing left to glue. The picture was gone. Just ashes. And me? I stood up calmly, walked into the kitchen, the quietest room in the house now, and poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle they'd left half full the night before. It tasted like validation. I let the silence wrap around me like a warm coat, and then I reached for my phone. I scrolled past old texts, past unopened notifications, and pressed one number I hadn't dialed in a long, long time. It rang twice. Then a voice picked up low, male, familiar. I didn't wait for him to speak first. I just said, yeah. It's done. They know. I kept my end. He didn't say anything at first, just breathed. Then came the question I knew was coming but didn't know if I'd be able to answer. Are you okay? And I wasn't. Not really. But I was something better. I was free. It arrived in a plain envelope, no stamp, no note. Just slid under the door like something too heavy to knock. I found it that morning while stepping over an old dog toy one of Bree's kids must have left behind during the Christmas chaos, though chaos doesn't even begin to describe what that week had turned into. I picked it up like it might bite me, but deep down I knew exactly what it was before I even opened it. The weight of it, the silence of it, the timing of it, my father's quiet revenge delivered in Manila. The revised will was short, clinical, direct. The house, once promised to Bree in every family anecdote and backhanded compliment, was now legally mine. Not shared. Not split. Not debated. Just mine. There were no added conditions, no flowery justifications, just a signature and a date that proved he'd made the decision after Christmas Day. After the page. After the explosion. I stared at it for a long time, not really feeling anything at first, just trying to absorb it the way you try to feel a change in the weather before the rain comes. But then the calm rolled in. Not joy, not victory, just a stillness I hadn't felt in decades, like some angry ghost had finally stopped screaming inside my chest. I folded the paper slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and poured myself a cup of black coffee that tasted a little too much like closure. The phone calls came 2 days later, first from Bree, then from Mom, though I didn't answer either. Bree left a voicemail that started calm and ended with her screaming something about how she deserved that house, like bricks and drywall were earned by pretending to be perfect. Her voice cracked at the end, not because she was angry, but because she was terrified. She wasn't losing a house, she was losing her mirror, the one she used to reflect the version of herself she wanted everyone to believe. Mom's voicemail was different. It wasn't angry. It was cold. She asked if I thought I'd won something, like this was a game, like I was the villain who'd shown up just to ruin her carefully crafted fantasy. She didn't say sorry. Of course she didn't. She never learned how to. She said, "You don't know what it's like to live with a mistake for 35 years, and I almost dropped the phone from how hard I laughed. Because yes, I do. I've lived with hers my whole damn life. That phone call I made in the kitchen after Dad walked out, it wasn't some mystery man. It wasn't a secret brother or a long-lost love. It was my lawyer. I'd found the DNA result in an old folder from a free clinic in Tulsa where I used to volunteer. It had fallen behind a drawer. I don't even know why I'd brought it home, but something in me had known it mattered. I'd kept it sealed for years, waiting for the right time. I never planned to use it, not really, but I'd made a copy anyway, one for myself, one for the lawyer, just in case this family ever tried to gaslight me again into thinking I was crazy. When I walked through the house a week later, empty now, all voices and faces gone, just shadows clinging to corners, I felt like I was breathing without a weight on my back for the first time. The silence was mine. The kitchen, still faintly smelling of cinnamon and lies, was mine. Even the den, where Dad had sat with the truth in his hands, was mine now. I stood in the hallway, hand running along the wall where Bree and I had measured our heights as kids, pencil lines still faintly visible under the fresh paint. I thought about erasing them. I thought about preserving them. Instead, I just whispered, "This home never felt like mine," until I burned it down. I didn't need the house. I didn't even want it. But having it, owning it after all these years, wasn't about the space. It was about the shift. The narrative had changed. The lie had collapsed. And in the rubble, I found my shape again. I packed a small suitcase that night, just enough for a week away. I wasn't staying here, not now, not yet. Maybe not ever. I just needed one last walk through the ghost of the life they tried to give me. I walked to the door, gripped the handle, and pulled it open. And there she was. Bree stood on the front steps, arms folded, face drawn and tired. No makeup, no earrings, no performance. Just her. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, not speaking, not blinking. I saw the question in her eyes. Why did you do this? Why now? Why us? But I wasn't going to give her that answer. Some truths belong to the ones who suffered for them. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder, exhaled slowly, and asked the only question left to ask. So, what are you going to do now? She didn't answer. And maybe that was the most honest moment we'd ever shared.